Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard to explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
Hey, Carrie, guess who we get to talk to today?
Who, David?
We have Mpho Tutu van Furth. She's in the Netherlands. Yeah.
What an honor. What an honor to have you here today with us.
First of all, how are you doing, Mpho?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, we're doing pretty well, right? Carrie's waiting. She is being treated for a knee injury
Yes.
Oh dear.
Yes, my son's Croc and I had a little bit of an argument and I tore my MCL. So I am in a cast and waiting for more instructions about whether I'll be doing surgery, which is unlikely, or just physical therapy. So fun times.
For those who don't know, she is the Reverend Mpho Tutu, and the Episcopal priest and founding director of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. That might be up for some redefinition. I do know that you are the priest of All Saints in Amsterdam, and I get your emails, and it sounds like it's something you're excited about doing, a relatively new endeavor. And she is the daughter of the Nobel laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And when I first invited you, one of the things I was hoping for us to talk about was your relationship to the Anglican Church because of their exclusion. However, that was last year when I invited you. And since then, we've had 7 months of attacks in Gaza after, Hamas launched the initial attack, and it has turned to one of the most gruesome things in our lifetimes. So I'm hoping, as a South African, really, you can help us process that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and give you the mic, if you will, and just talk about your story. And you can cover whatever you feel like covering.
Well, I thank you for inviting me onto your podcast, and maybe to complete the description, since you introduced me as the daughter of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which I am indeed, but no reverse immaculate conception there. I do have a mom, and my mother is Nomalizo Leah Shenglani, or born Nomalizo Leah Shenglani. And she mercifully is very much alive, and 90 years old. And I am an Episcopal priest, so ordained in the Episcopal Church in the U.S., which is the American flavor of the Anglican Church. And the Episcopal Church is welcoming and affirming, which is not true of all of the churches in the Anglican Communion, which is also part of the reason for beginning the church in Amsterdam, for planting the congregation in Amsterdam, there is an Anglican congregation, there's an Anglican church here in Amsterdam, but it's the English flavor. And so not welcoming and affirming, and part of our mission and ministry as a church is to have our doors and our arms wide open to welcome anyone who wants to join us for worship and witness. And I grew up in South Africa, in England, in the US, married and moved to the US, and then divorced and remarried. And my wife is a doctor, a professor, and a pediatrician here in the Netherlands, and so I moved to the Netherlands with that marriage. It's a priest, I think, is a little bit easier to relocate than a professor and a doctor, just because of the differences in licensing requirements. Although I was not quite as easy to move as I thought I was, coming here as I did. And I have, over the past 6-7 years of being here in Amsterdam, had a life of preaching, teaching, public speaking, leading workshops, writing. I think I've published a book in the time that I've been here.
Which book is that?
It is a book on reparations, a small book in the My Theology series that, funnily enough, I don't have at hand, but it's called Reparations and Forgiveness, The Healing Journey, and talks about how, the necessity for reparations in the conversation around forgiveness for racism, colonialism, slavery. And that, I do have a copy. So it's a really slim little thing that is brought out by Darton Longman Todd. It's the press that
I'm just amazed that I don't know about that, because it sounds very interesting.
Well, I think it's worth a read. So have at it.
I was impacted by
ordering it right now.
The book that you co-wrote with your father, the book of Forgiving. Actually, that was my introduction to you and to your voice, because I also had the audio book form, and which was very beautiful to hear your conversation with your dad that way. With all apologies, I have claimed your dad as my own for decades. And my dad died in 2019, but I used to tell him that your dad and also Nelson Mandela were also my dad, and that I was influenced. And I mean, I feel their presence in my life, even post departure. So, the space that they occupied on this planet, I think that it is exponentially greater now because of people around you. I guess that makes you and me siblings in a sort of way.
Indeed.
So so go ahead and tell us more.
Yeah, no, I think, as I said in writing the book of Forgiving, that came out of my father's book that he wrote after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was No Future Without Forgiveness, that spoke to the necessity for forgiveness in order for us to find a way forward together in the world. The book of Forgiving was kind of the how-to book that was attached to that idea of a world of forgiveness being what is necessary if we hope for a world of peace. But one of the things that I recognized in thinking about that book in the years afterwards is that we talked about forgiveness as a journey in 4 parts, that you tell the story, you name the hurt, you grant forgiveness, and you either reconcile or release the relationship. And the reality is that both of us really operated from an Ubuntu framework. And the Ubuntu framework says that my healing and your healing are actually bound together. And so when we talked about granting forgiveness, the idea of granting forgiveness is in as I've lived here and in other parts of the world, I've come to understand that we have a real difference in languaging. So, for instance, in Dutch, if you say I'm sorry, you'll say het spijt me, which always sounds to me, you say het, which is kind of that thing over there that actually has nothing to do with me. So het spijt me kind of sounds as though you're relinquishing any responsibility for what it is that happened. So that thing over there that has nothing to do with me, I'm so sorry about it. In English, you'll say, I'm sorry, forgive me, and then it's all about me. I'm so bad, I've done all the bad things, I've done it all wrong, and it's all about me, 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 me. In Xhosa, when you ask for forgiveness or when you apologize, you say ndicela uxolo, which literally means I ask for peace. And the understanding that's embedded in there is I can't have peace unless you have peace. And you can't have peace unless I have peace. So in order for us to be able to move forward, we must both be at peace. And so what will it take for us to get to
I can see how that...
What language was that in? I'm sorry, what?
Xhosa.
Xhosa?
Xhosa. Xhosa.
Thank you.
I can see how that flows out of Ubuntu, yes.
And so the mentality with which we rise is an Ubuntu mentality where you then don't have to specify that there has to be some sort of reparation, because that's kind of embedded in the idea of healing. What will it take for you to heal? I need to do the thing that it'll take to heal you. And that the idea of reparation isn't an idea of you're going to give me back whatever it was that you took, because so very often it's impossible for you to give me back whatever it was that you took. But you can give me something that acknowledges that you recognize the damage that you've done and your desire to repair the damage. And so that may be some monetary form of restitution, but it may be something completely different that I need in order to be able to heal. And so we, it kind of in a Western frame, we get really tangled up in the idea of reparations being, okay, they're going to come after all the things that I have. And that kind of the idea is literally payback, not repair. And that if we actually reframe in our minds to think of the goal as being repair, then we don't enter the conversation around reparations with so much fear. We enter the conversation around reparations with the idea that we want to heal whatever it was that got hurt, so that we can be community together, so that we can be restored to being a human family together.
That's so beautiful. And I have so many thoughts in my head. I'm trying to think about where to go first. So one of the places that the lens that I view the world is through whiteness studies, right? I study whiteness, and I try to heal whiteness because we are in so much need of healing, to your point. and that we have to take responsibility for our own healing if we're ever going to heal the wounds of the world and the wound of dominance that's within us. And so I love what you said about the way that you say I'm sorry is to say I ask for peace, and asking for peace between us, right? Because I think that so many members of the dominant society, and I'll just say the dominant society, especially here in the United, the context of the United States, when we hear reparations, again, we go, as you said, we go right to fear. We go right to what is going to be taken away. But if we could reframe that conversation to say, we are asking for peace, not for all of us, right? That when we offer peace to those we have harmed, we will also be at peace, right? That is a whole new way to explore that conversation and to actually move us toward creating the beloved community. And so my mind is just a little bit blown by that concept. And yeah, just kind of sitting there. I don't know if you have any more words to say about that, or if David has anything to say about that, but what a beautiful concept.
Thank you. David, did you have thoughts?
Yes. I'm thinking that if colonial Christianity, we do everything we can to extract that which is useful and beautiful and valuable to us from the faith that we've all been exposed to in the West. I'm just wondering if churches, if communions would need to lead the way in some way to articulate a philosophy of reparations, and if reparations could also be part of the conversation for how churches have injured people who are not cisgender, heterosexual. If there is some kind of reparation offering there as well that should be discussed.
I think, I think having recently been in several spaces where I was with and among people from the LGBTQIA plus community who have experienced various harms from many of our faith communities, not only Christian communities, but communities of other religious faiths as well, and how deep the wounds are. The imagining what would be balm for those wounds, I think. I think it's something that can lead us into deeper conversations on how to be human in all aspects of our humanity, because we have so many aspects of our humanity that are challenged by power structures that insist on power over and that insist on control, command, systems of control and command rather than systems of welcome and create, welcome and co-create, that are some of the places where our deepest hungers are, that the hunger to connect, the hunger to be welcome, the hunger to be seen, and the hunger to have our creativity and our places as co-creators with God, to have that affirmed.
Your father used to say, and of course now we may not embrace the idea of the binary of going, you die and you go to a good place or a bad place. But I remember your father used to say that if he died and he went to heaven and there were no queer folks there, that he would ask to be sent to the other place. So where is your dad today?
In Uganda, there is currently a bill in the Ugandan parliament that's being challenged in the courts, but a bill that would impose the death penalty on people for queerness. And I think listening to some of the faith leaders who have come out in favor of that bill, which is absolutely horrifying, who speak about queer people as sinners who will go to hell. I'd have to say, well, I guess, I guess he's gone to the other place.
What do you think is the connection between policies like the one happening in Uganda and Gaza?
Well, it's all systems of command, containment, and violence. I know that the claim is that the bombardment of Gaza is in response to the atrocities of October 7th. But that makes it sound as though history began on October 7th, that nothing preceded October 7th, and that the colonization of Palestine, the Nakba, the racism actually that is embedded in that system, because I mean, if the reality of Israel is not an apartheid system, it looks like one. It's walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, but I guess it's a swan. And the horror is all the more horrifying because Western powers continue to justify sending military hardware, bombs to massacre a people, and then will turn around. It's almost 45 people were buried under a building in Gaza today. 3 people died in Ukraine. Guess which one is leading the front page? And please explain to me how there is no racism embedded in the treatment of the 2 wars.
Or how about the anti-Blackness involved in the fact that there's no mention of Congo, right? Of what's happening in Congo or in Haiti or
yeah. I mean, it's just, and the thing that I continue to find striking is how difficult it is for Western powers to raise humanitarian assistance for anything, anywhere in the world. It's, it's kind of, well, we promised 95 million, but we'll send 50 and, whatever it is. But, arms and ammunition, the billions just keep rolling in. It's,
I'm also very curious about something, and I'm hoping you can provide insight, because this is something that I get stuck on often. And earlier you talked a little bit about the hunger to be seen, the hunger to be connected, and I'm curious because the more work that I do in studying systems of dominance, something really annoying happens to me, which is that I begin to feel compassion for the dominant, the people that I would really prefer to continue to be angry at, right? Because I see how those systems of dominance do serious harm to and create soul wounds in the dominant identities within systems of dominance. What do you think is the connection between that hunger to be seen, to feel connected, to be loved, to be cared about, with the need and the greed for power, especially the kind of power that we're seeing at play now, the very destructive power over?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% sure how that works psychologically, but my suspicion is is that it's a sort of a flavor of imposter syndrome. The sense that if I stood in front of you with my vulnerable self, would you see me, connect with me, affirm me? Whereas if I drop a bomb on you, you have to acknowledge that I'm there. You know, that this is the only way that I have to guarantee, you know, and maybe it's just, you know, kind of in a small corner of the self, that the only way that I get to be certain of being seen, affirmed, fated, welcome, is by leading with my power, leading with my
Well,
power
like the opposite
over,
of a love
as opposed
language.
to yes.
That finding identity in a hate language. Up until very recently, if one would look at a map of the world and notice the countries that recognize Palestinian statehood, and I'm not going to argue a case for statehood, because the nation state is not a holistic solution for anything in my estimation. But if you look at a global map, up until very recently, it's the countries that did not recognize Palestine are also the countries that have the longest history of anti-Semitism. So it's like they want to honor the state of Israel because of a historic problem that the rest of the world really is not responsible for. But we are caught in this trap of powerful nations working out this, what Carrie was talking about, this, you know, the psychology of all of this. We're watching countries, powerful countries, work things out, and their economies are exclusive, their territories are exclusive. They have removed indigenous peoples and killed them, and now they're doing the same thing to Palestinians, or either doing it or allowing it to happen, because they don't want to be anti-Semitic, when the rest of the world doesn't have that history the way that the white countries, the Western countries do. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of the scapegoat. So the Palestinians get to carry the Western guilt, you know, for their anti-Semitism. Number one, they get to carry the Western guilt, but number two, the Jewish population is no longer in Europe. It's all moved to the Middle East, where, you know, we've managed to get rid of you, and we've managed to, we'll give you all the arms in the world, because now you can keep control of everyone in that neighborhood for us. And, you know, as long as you're in Europe, you're Jewish, but as soon as you go to the Middle East as a Jewish person, you're white.
Letting that sink in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's a cynical and painful game.
So the way you frame that, it almost makes it look like whiteness is power. Or maybe in our world, power is whiteness.
At the moment, yes.
I think
for a long moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Long, unbearable moment.
Yes. I think one of the things that is so difficult, you know, again, being in the context of the United States, being in the context of having a lot of friends who are Jewish, and living in a town that has a very high Jewish population, and seeing there's a synagogue right down the street, and they are currently having, like, over Memorial Day, they had a huge, I'm not sure exactly, some kind of ceremony where they had a lot of Israeli flags and American flags right outside, and they have big pictures of the hostages and say bring them home. And I recognize, and even a few months ago on my street, something happened where there was a car that came. There was a sign. One of my neighbors are Jewish. They had a sign that's Israeli sign in front of their lawn. And a car came and basically harassed them, just drove up and down the street right in front of their house, blaring curse words about Israel. And it was very threatening. It was a very threatening thing to happen on my quiet little street. Mm-hmm. And so recognizing that for Jewish individuals, they are experiencing a deep embodied fear, right? And at the same time, this government that they are supporting in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, they are supporting an Israeli government that is involved in this genocide because of this deep embodied fear that they are experiencing. And I have to say, I have compassion for that. I don't agree with it, but I have compassion for that kind of fear, that very, for lack of a better word, that very triggered fear of I feel endangered. And so therefore I'm going that annihilation trauma response. Let's just annihilate. Right. And that is actually a trauma response that is less known than, fight, flight, but it is a common trauma response. And so how do we, with kindness and compassion and yet firmness, talk with or care for our Jewish neighbors who really are experiencing that such a deep fear that they are willing to tolerate and even encourage the horrific genocide that is happening in Gaza?
I think that one of our challenges is that Jewishness and Israeliness and Zionism have been conflated.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that has been quite deliberate and intentional, because it keeps the society tied up in knots over, what can we say and what can we not say. I am absolutely not anti-Jewish. I am absolutely not anti-Semitic. I am absolutely anti-Zionist.
Yes.
And I am 100% and 500% anti-genocidal.
Yes.
And, so the pushback on languaging has to be so much stronger, because the conflation is deadly.
Mm-hmm.
It is deadly for Jewish people, and it is deadly for Palestinians, and it needs to stop. We need to be very clear what it is that we are fighting for and what it is that we are fighting against, what it is that we oppose. And it is absolutely not Jewishness or Jewish people who we oppose. There's no person who I would say deserves to die. And there's no circumstance in which I would say anyone deserves to die. Maybe that's just me, but that is very firmly my belief and my standpoint. And I think, as much as Jewish people deserve to be able to live without fear, so do Palestinians.
Yes.
Speaking of compassion, also, and this has just been in the past couple of weeks, I have just been feeling, throughout my body, this growing compassion for Jews, some of whom I know. Had a conversation with Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb, who was one of the first women ordained, and she's been anti-Zionist. She's in her 70s now, and her whole adult life, she has been fighting against Zionism as a Jew. And now we're watching all of these young people, especially the university campuses, where many Jews feel the burden of having to define themselves. What's tougher in living in a society where you have to define yourself as a human being? You have to define yourself as a person who is rational and compassionate, and you're fighting for that. And so I've been feeling this compassion for the and it's a pretty considerable percentage. Yes, I know that most Jews in our society are Zionists, but there's a growing number of them who are saying, "Not in our name."
Indeed. My late father-in-law was Jewish, was a Holocaust survivor. Here in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, before the war, the Jewish population of Amsterdam was around 80,000 people. 60,000 of them were sent to concentration camps in the war. And so the Netherlands has quite a history with anti-Semitism. My father-in-law was in hiding for much of the war. And as a young man and as an older man, in fact, he married my mother-in-law, who had died by the time Marceline and I married, had family in South Africa. My father-in-law refused to go to South Africa, and in fact said, you can't go either. But that was, that he would not have any truck with the apartheid state, and was really vehemently anti-racist. And I see so many Jewish people who are saying, "Not in my name," but who come from that same standpoint. That that I know what happened to me in the Second World War. I know what happened to people like me in the Second World War. I am not going to have that imposed on anyone else in my name.
It's interesting, when you said before that when Jews were in Europe, they were Jewish, but when they come to the Middle East, they're white, right? And when David made the comments, that they are some are now having to kind of, in essence, say not all Jewish people, right? Like that's again, it's one of those annoying places where I use a phrase called intersectional dominance, which talks about this unique experience of being in a body that is both oppressed and dominant, depending on who's in the room with you at any given time, right? And one of the things that happens with those of us who are intersectionally dominant is we tend to notice our oppression more than we notice our power. And so then when we are confronted with somebody calling us out for our power, we want to say, like, not all white people, not all, and it's a very uncomfortable place to be, right? And so I think that, to David's point, the Jewish people are now experiencing, some Jewish people are now really experiencing how that lands in their bodies, and that they have to recognize that they are affiliated, and what is the responsibility that they have in their affiliation with this identity of power, right? That they can't only rely on their history of being oppressed, right? It's so complicated. It's such a complicated, layered, and nuanced thing.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it's I think that probably holds true for all of us, that we tend to lean into our narratives of oppression rather than our narratives of power. I remember as a college student, I was at Howard University in Washington in the 1980s. So, which was, South Africa was still under apartheid, and there was there were a few Black South African students on campus, and we would greet each other, like, "How are you doing?" "Yeah, I'm Black and oppressed." Which was true, but it actually was not the whole truth, because we were definitely Black and oppressed, yes, but we were also the privileged few who were living outside South Africa, who were getting a university education, who, had opportunities that even some white South Africans would have envied. And yet the self-description continued to be, I'm willing to describe my oppression, and I'm not quite so willing to unpack my privilege and consider where my privilege can be used to ally myself to others who are having experiences of oppression.
How very priestly of you to present it that way. I'm just wondering if this podcast were discovered by somebody, 80, 90 years from now, what would you like to be on the record? What represents you? What are you most passionate? And what's really important?
I was having a conversation with my wife a couple of days ago. My wife is an atheist, but that's okay. At least she thinks she is.
I like to be a fly on the wall. But anyway, go ahead.
Right?
So I'm just going to hope she doesn't discover this podcast.
We won't tell her. We won't tell her.
It was just a snippet of conversation about how wildly and wonderfully creative God is, and how all of the diversity that we see in the world, in like animals of every shape and nature, and fish in the sea, and birds in the air, and people and plants, and all of everything, and that and we as human beings keep kind of wanting to make a pocket-sized God, that make a God who fits within the narrow confines of our imaginations. And I was thinking about, wow, we talk about this God who is violent and vengeful and really quite mean and unkind even. And I was thinking, actually, is this really the God you want to worship? And, and would you even want to be that God? Is, if you were going to be God, is that really who you would choose to be? As opposed to this, wild, wide, wonderful God who we actually get to worship, in whose image we get to have been made. And yeah, I think what I am passionate about is wanting us to imagine what a God of love would really be. That when we bump up against our most judgy, critical, self-critical selves.
You're making me think of Jesus in this light. Jesus, who said that that people needed to become like children, that people needed to change and become like a child. And I don't think Jesus ever said anything in the way that could be construed as projection. I mean, he wasn't saying, do as I say, but not as I do. He was saying that I am vulnerable. Jesus was saying that I am like a child. So if you want to be like me, so if you extend that to include the idea of God, all right? So maybe God is this wild, curious, innovative, imaginative existence.
A God of becoming, a God who is still becoming, right? I love that image of a God who is still becoming, because it means we can become too.
And so, 80, 90 years from now, what if that's the main way that people look at God.
Yay!
Yes, hooray!
Yes. What would that do for society, Mpho?
Yeah. If we went out into the world, woohoo!
Well, we are pretty much at the close of our hour, and it has been such an honor and a privilege to speak with you today. Do you have, in closing, any words of wisdom and grace for those of us who are feeling heavy with the weight of the world and all that is happening?
I don't even remember who it was who said that we must work like everything depends on us, that we must pray because everything depends on God, and that we must trust the fruit of our prayer, that God is just waiting to hear us, to ask in love for love. Amen.
And when it comes to your book, your more recent one, Forgiveness and Reparation, The Healing Journey, is there an audiobook form of that one?
No, not yet. I'll have to ask if that can be done.
Because remember, I was drawn in by the conversation you had with your father. And so I would feel like it would be really nice to hear you read the book to me.
Okie doke. I will ask the publisher if that's a doable, and I'll be happy to have that done.
Well, I already ordered the print version while we were talking, so it's on its way.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yes.
Thank you as well.
Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell, and we want to know about it. Please contact us on Twitter at GodIsNotAnAsshole or text 805-703-8393, because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole. The show's music is composed by Christian Moore, show art created by Evan Kerr, and the episodes are produced by Josh Perez.